Welcome to the Shaman Vision podcast. I got another great guest with me. This guy right here, he's an artist, he's a musician, and he's a thinker and all around, man. Every time I have a conversation with Dereck, we always have a cool conversation. I always gain new insight. I always gain new perspective, man. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Hey, man, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
No doubt,
You have
man.
an excellent podcast.
Say what?
Your podcast is excellent. Like your dad and Tommy, man, it was great stuff. It's great stuff.
I appreciate it, man. I'm trying, the whole goal is like bring in people, everyday people that are movers and shakers, that are artists, that are thinkers, and just bring them in and get their perspective, I want to hear what people are thinking about the times we live in, their art, and, how to push our culture forward, man. And so let's get right into it. What's your thoughts on what's going on in 2020? The coronavirus, the protests, what are you thinking?
It's interesting to watch people learn about chaos. Yeah, man, it's I don't even know where to start with most of it, because like it's no matter where people want to land with whether or not it was orchestrated or any of that stuff. Things are happening. So
things are definitely happening.
Kind of like it's like if you get your finger cut off or something, you can point your nub at whomever did it or circumstance, but it doesn't change the fact you still have to deal with the problem. Right. And
so from your perspective, how should us people that are wanting the peaceful revolution of people having their civil rights and then people enjoying their liberties, how do you think we accomplish that?
Oh, wow. Like
that's a hard question. I know it's a hard question.
Right? What makes water wet? Like
that's God. That's the universe. That is
Fair point. I'm behind it, like, because what we have is a bunch of outmoded architecture that's going on. I don't know. It's like we're experiencing cultural hubris on a scale nobody planned, and we all knew it was coming. Yeah. Like, I was talking to my bandmate yesterday. Actually, it's one of the tracks I sent you. I don't mean to be so self-serving. It's just
no, don't worry about it, man.
That deals with like it's that disenfranchised song, and it's like we're disenfranchised because, and these, I'm not quoting the lyrics, I'm just talking about the idea. Like, we're as a culture disenfranchised because we asked for it. Like that, I spelled it with a Z because it has to do with an Americanization of stuff. And
so when you say we asked for it, what do you mean by that? What do you mean we asked for it?
We bought in, man. Like, it's the great buy-in. I went to a festival years and years ago, and it was like a trippy festival. But the thing that fascinated me about it was like a bunch of camp out sites that were like, like you name it, all walks of life. Like, you go from one place and it's like Grateful Dead, hippy dippy, to like hardcore thugs right next to them that were real gangsters, no question about it. Like, they were there on business. And it was just like a commingling of people. And the thing I noticed was like who had the coolest, it was like a contest for who had the coolest doodad or the gadget that did things. And we're fascinated with that. Like,
oh yeah. If you're talking about materialism, buying into materialism, us as Americans definitely have bought into that for sure.
Yeah, I wish it was just
there has to be some type of distinction between capitalism and human rights, I think. When you talk about we asked for it, not every so-called American in this country asked to come in this country. A lot of these Americans are here because their land got trampled over, and now they are put in a little corner of America. And a lot of people came willingly, and a lot of people came unwillingly, and they were forced to come here. So, it's a hard circumstance, and I don't know if we chose this circumstance. I think we've been fighting this for a long time, man. I've been all day, while I was working, I've been watching Malcolm X speeches and listening to ministers from the Nation of Islam speak. And this situation needs to be I don't know, man. This situation has been happening for a long time. When I hear Martin Luther King and when I hear Malcolm X talk about the same issues and the same struggles we're having right now, and they're talking about it in 1960, like it's crazy. You know what I mean? It's 2020 now. We're living in the future, and we're still faced and plagued with the same sicknesses and the same problems.
Yeah, I really respect both of those characters, and I think I'm just going to throw this out. Modern day amalgamation of those two characters, Dave Chappelle.
Oh man,
He's smartest dudes and the most
oh man,
level characters out there.
man. His special, I'm sure you've seen it, 846.
Oh, repeatedly.
Yeah, it was great. And in the way, there's a talent. I think it's called like an orator. When you're able to speak and you're able to make sense and you're able to condense a whole lot of complicated information and make it to where it's digestible for the people. You know what I mean? And he's excellent at that.
Yeah, yeah. And the other side of that's like rhetoricians, where they're just sort of like mimetics, and they'll say they're talking heads, right? They'll say whatever.
It's so ridiculous, man, because a lot of those people in the media, they're reading a script. They're not speaking from their heart. They're not speaking from their mind. They're reading something that somebody else thinks. You know what I mean? And that's why, I know that, nowadays there's alternatives to the media. There's podcasts, there's blogs, there is alternatives. But I think as a culture and as people that are trying to see the change or see the so-called revolution, we need to stay away from the media because the media has never served us.
Yeah, again, going back to Chappelle, he's just such a point of intrigue. His bird revelations, I've watched that. Like, dude, I pick a hyperbole. I've seen it a bunch of times because there's so much in it, and I forget which special it's in, but he talks about apartheid. He talks about Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and how they had to, like, they realized that the way that ended peaceably was that they had to put the system on trial.
Yeah.
And like, we're in a state, like a state of affairs, I mean, that is, people are not ready to do that. And that's what I meant by the disenfranchised idea, is that everyone is born by happenstance in a vacuum of incident. Like, everybody can claim that as many people can claim as they want that, people are intentionally born and all this crap, everybody plans stuff, but it's all a clusterfuck. Yeah. Like, people are just showing up. We're here and we're like showing up in bewilderment, trying to make sense of stuff. And then we're so quickly, because of things like the Greek idea of mimesis, where we get memes and stuff, right? Where it's easy to just like monkey see, monkey do in life. Right. And it's hard to challenge stuff because we have a culture that is a shame silence culture. If you are intellectual, forget about it. And that's not true for everyone, but there's a lot of this like anti-intellectualism, like people I've known for years that are quite smart, that are still like, I don't know. It's like fear-based decision-making. It goes back to this thing we've discussed a bunch, right? It's like existential. That's like the life of the tragedian, somebody that lives a life of affirmation where they don't deny any of the experience, because good and bad don't exist fundamentally. They're just concepts we grasp at, because everything has a context. It's like
I've had the same argument. I've had the same argument, and I've heard smart people say it. And I'm not sold on that. I get that as a philosophy. I get the yin and yang of life. I totally understand that. But I think there is evil, like unquestionable evil, unquestionable bad. And I think it's not so much due to context, or it's not so much due to the situation. I think that there are some things in life that are just not right. And you disagree with that?
Not necessarily. I think that people make desperate decisions, and that doesn't excuse behaviors. It's like fear-based decision-making leads into further fear-based decisions. It's like, if you have a chronic injury, you carry yourself to protect it, and it makes you vulnerable in other ways. And the more that you get your vulnerabilities attacked by accident and coincidence, right? Meaning that people don't intentionally go after it, although some do. It's still a point where a person gets injured. So it has to do with adjustment and forgiveness fundamentally. Like, forgiveness is the hardest thing to do. I had we'll say like a month ago, I had an asthmatic induced near-death experience, which is not unusual. I didn't lose my eyesight. That happens sometimes. Like your second order senses, like vision, go first when you are out of oxygen. And I call it dynamic tension because you have to relax through something that is harrowing to experience because everything costs oxygen when it's energy. And that means even breathing. And so when you're in that state, you start to realize, it's like what you're talking about with materialism, where the fetters of the world, you get to take an inventory that you don't plan on because whatever is calling the shots and creates this experience doesn't care about that. There's a scale, the universe scales ruthlessly. I'll state it like that. And it balances accounts every time. If you ask, it will deliver because that's its duty.
Right.
And
Well, I think you brought up a really good point when you're talking about apartheid and Nelson Mandela, and he said that they had to. Did you say they had to seek counsel from the United Nations in order to get change done? You were mentioning that, right? They had to bring it to a court.
Yeah.
They had to bring the country to court, correct?
Yeah, I didn't mention that part of it, but please continue.
I just thought that was an interesting point because listening to Malcolm X speak today, he brought up the same idea. It was like, we got to go to the United Nations with this. We got to put United States in court for the injustices they've done, in our time, in our short 300, 400 years, America's been a thing. They have to be held accountable for what they've done. But going to what you're saying, I like what you said about the universe balancing out. What were you saying about that? How it scaled out?
Actually, I want to comment on what you just said because it's like we're fatally attracted, at least in the U.S. It seems. I can't speak for other countries by any means, to this hero complex, and it's like we feel like we're above the law, and it can't be that way because if there's no accountability, that's what's led to this is a lack of accountability. It's like if you can buy your way out of it or schmooze your way through it, then you get special privileges.
Oh yeah.
But nobody's exceptional except when it's conveniently, acceptable.
Yeah.
And it's all too greasy in the way that it's connected with power and circumstance.
Yeah, and money. If you have money in this country, you can get away with a lot of stuff that you can't get away with if you don't have that money. A perfect example is lawyers in court. You know what I mean? If you get a speeding ticket and you can't afford a lawyer, then you get a speeding ticket at docks points on your record or whatever. But if you have the money to afford a lawyer, you could get dropped down to a littering charge or whatever.
And if you don't pay the money, they punish you for representing yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't know how to talk the talk, which they make purposely difficult.
Right.
No.
Right. Yeah,
So you know how I wound up in St. Joe, actually, is I had gotten into a couple of bouts of legal trouble up in Maryville. And I had I got dogpiled by like a dozen police officers. And I'm not shitting you. There were 50 witnesses to it. And I was just exiting a party, and it's a Dave Chappelle recursion. Somebody had gloves on. Like this cop had these like biker gloves on. They just looked silly to me. And I was leaving to go home, and I was drunk. I was just like, those are some Michael Jackson looking gloves. And I got thrown on my face. I didn't know how it happened. So I started to stand up, and then I was resisting, and they were just pile. And like, so I just verbally protested throughout the whole thing. And that's my cat, sorry. It didn't account for anything. And my dad, he and I are close. Okay. He loaned me a truck today and helped me sort out the issues that I was having. He gave me some advice, which was like, he knew that I wasn't like, when I caught those charges, I got put on probation for a month, and then I caught a DWI a month into probation. So like that, I'm super not proud. And that was 15 years ago or more. But when that happened, I was just fed up with the situation. And my dad was like, look, I don't know what to tell you. You know what the police are like in Nottoway County. We are not a family of money or prominence. So you need to get out of the county. So I moved to St. Joseph, and it was like, I already knew that, but hearing him say it to me, it's like, we talk a lot. And it's one of those things. I know he didn't want to suggest that, but it was like, when that happened, it's like what I talked to you about before we decided to do this, is like, I'm not, there's a thing I want to bring up that's comparative suffering. And this is what people like to use. I actually had an issue with this, is why I was late to do this podcast, where it's like, people feel like they're getting not necessarily the raw deal, but it's like people get concerned with their own concerns and then they sort of disregard each other unintentionally. And it's so hard to step out of that cycle as it starts to happen.
So you're talking about people kind of individualizing their problems and not looking out for the problems of other groups? Like this group has
Yes.
this problem and I'm not worried about this group and their problem. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Or it's too easy to be like, hey, now I'm ready to support this group because they happen to coincide with my own beef with life or whatever it is. And I don't necessarily, I'm trying to demean anybody's intention with that. Like I had mentioned to you, I was being called spineless by somebody that's a good friend of mine because I wasn't violently protesting in the past weeks. And I'm like, I got thrown down by police and like they knew me by name for years in a county because of the way it had played out. And I'm not a Johnny Badass. I'm not John Wayne. That's the problem.
That brings up a good question, man. A question I wanted to ask you is, what is the role of our white allies in this revolution? I know it's another hard question for you, Dereck, but what is the role for our white allies?
We exercise compassion, and by we, I mean every human being does that. I like Bruce Lee's response to it. He's like, I'm a human being. He didn't give a shit if you called him Asian or American or however you wanted to categorize it, because those are tools to divide us.
Yes, yeah.
One way or another. And I'm not taking anything away from people that want to celebrate their cultures. Okay, so I get this thing because people presume I'm Irish. I think I'm more Scottish than Irish, but you know what? Both sides of my maternal and paternal ancestors despised Europe so strongly that they did the equivalent of going to Mars in the 1600s and the 1700s. And they got on a fucking ship and they're like, anywhere but here, anywhere but here. And so when people like do this, it's a regional thing, right? Irish pride's a big deal. I'm like, I don't even have American pride because like I have personhood because I'm a misfit in life by default. I don't try when I was younger, yeah, sure, I tried to be edgy or whatever. And really what I was trying to do is just be accepted for who I am.
Right.
And an am doesn't even exist if we want to get into that discussion, but that's like a whole fucking ball of wax to get into because like there are more categories we use for labeling, and Kierkegaard's the one that said something about to label one is to negate their personhood.
Dude, I totally agree. I totally agree. It has been purposeful that there's been a separation between people based on their belief system, based on their politics, based on their skin color. You know what I mean? I think there's a purposeful divide because I've been trying to preach this on the podcast, man. We all have a lot more in common than we don't. You know, all of us eat
That's
shit, we breathe.
What they're trying to weaponize again.
Right, but we all have families. I personally believe that 75% of the country believes that the policing situation in the country, especially in regards to how they deal with black people, is sick and is wrong. I believe that 75% of the people in this country, they want to see Americans have their civil rights. You know what I mean? We're all really on the same page. We're all really on the same side. We all really want to see justice and we want to see this country move forward, but they play these games with politics that don't really exist. But they play these games with religion that doesn't really exist, and they try to divide us as much as they can. I think you made a really good point with that, man. We have to stop. I know I asked you the question as a white ally because I want you to kind of spit some game and some knowledge for the people that are watching this that want to know how they could help. But really, it's a human issue. It's a human rights issue. When you see somebody suffering, that means you potentially have the potential to suffer too. So if you're going to let them suffer, that means you're opening yourself up to eventually suffer in the future if you're not careful. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I talked to my bandmates about this and other people that ask similar questions, or it's good. Thank you for asking questions. And I want to respond in kind because a lot of people ask questions that are really like browbeating. They want to like lecture in the form of, an interrogative or something. And so they lead you into a trap so that they can tell you how you're wrong about stuff. And so what I respond with is like, so when I said I went at life super hard in my teens and 20s and whatnot, what I learned is that the military complex is quite real. Whether or not it's a conspiracy, it is enormous. And then they are incentivized because taxpayers incentivize them, which is why I say we bought in to let you
let's
know
break that down.
that,
Let's break that down. Taxpayers incentivize them. Why? Because we pay taxes.
because we pay taxes to have law upheld, law and order. And so within that state, their duty is to dominate when a situation arises. And so when I felt like I was exercising my civil liberties, verbally protesting to the police, they chose to demonstrate that it was resisting arrest over and over. And so what they proved is that their boot is infinitely large. And so what I figured is that's a game I'll never win. So what I started doing was actively living a life of demonstration. I'm not on a soapbox here. I'm just stating that what I did, I don't go around spouting truths at people. I talk to people about how I feel about things and how best to try to bridge the gap. And so my art and music or stuff that I work with collaboratively in that regard is always in demonstration of what it's like to believe in the things that you think matter. So really what we're discussing is value and meaning.
Yes.
And go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask you that question as well. Where does the inspiration from your art come? And your band Deviator and your personal art, what is the message or the ethos that you're trying to present?
Right on. I would like to state that Deviator is a 5-piece. There are 4 members plus the band itself, so nobody owns it. And I think it's important to be that way. But nobody really knows what's going on. And in that, all bets are off. So like it is choose your own adventure. And that's how I want to look at life. I want to look at it as a tragic optimist, not as a blindly hopeful person, because like life doesn't give me passes. And I'm not saying I haven't like that I've had it worse than anyone, because we're back to comparative suffering then. All I'm saying is there are a lot of circumstances that I would hope play out other ways, but that doesn't change the way they're going to play. So I can either adjust and roll with it, or I can allow it to roll me under. And there have been plenty of opportunities for that. I failed a test with the universe this evening with the person I care about the most. And I hope that I can bridge that gap. And I don't mean to be too personal about that. It's just sometimes I don't wear my frustrations worth a damn. And that costs me good interactions with people I care about.
I understand. How does this reflect in your music and your artwork?
I don't tell it what to do. It tells me how to do it.
And so I just feel a lot of times it's your subconscious doing the work?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
And then like it's like it gives me like little nudges, like this over here.
You know, sometimes some of my favorite work is done. I don't even think about it. I'm just like, it's that state of play, you know, when you're a kid and you're playing and nothing really matters. It's not like, am I going to sell this piece? Or it's not like how deep or the meaning in this piece is. I'm playing, I'm having fun. And then it unravels. And then you look at something you did while you're playing and you're like, wow, this means something. This has depth. It has layers to it. And came straight from the subconscious. I wasn't even thinking about it. But after you create it, you can kind of project your own, you know, conscious on it, and you can kind of interpret it the way you want because you made it. But
I think that's the highest artistic expression. I look at that like replay value, because like if I have something that's say exhibited somewhere, like a painting, and people come up and they're like, "Hey, did you mean to put that in there?" I'll be like, "Oh, of course I did." You know, like I'm just joking, right? But usually like everybody sees different things, and that's like I work abstractly a lot because of that. Because there's this in art, it's like a smarty pants problem that's like visually oriented rather than like, you know, word oriented or like conversationally oriented, where it's like, look at how well I can render this thing that you recognize. And it's like, that's magnificent, but it also only requires time and discipline of effort to do that.
Right.
I wanted to ask you right quick, the background behind you, is that a piece of your own work?
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome, man. I'm just like,
I
keep looking at
that.
you, and then like eyes are doing this.
That. This is the piece I was talking about. One of the pieces I was talking about that came straight from the mind. I was like, it's actually a 3-piece painting, 2 by 4 panels, right? And I was playing with the design on one one panel, just playing with the design. And I was like, man, if I could flip that, it would look like a face with eyes. And then once I did that, I'm like, that's dope. If I could put a mouth on there, and then it kind of manifested itself. And then, you know, I attached all this meaning to it. But yeah, appreciate that.
So in abstract work, if faces and things like that start to show up, I'll accentuate those sometimes, and sometimes I'll render them like pretty fully, and other times I'll just allow the hints to remain. And that's what I enjoy, because there's this, you know, we're organizers as a species. Like, our brains work that way. We want to make sense of everything, and that's a survival mechanism. It's called edge detection, because you have to be able to differentiate spatial and your spatial awareness has to be acute, or like you get gobbled up. That's how the natural order goes.
Right. And
so like we're in a really elaborate form of that, where we've sort of at least temporarily overcome some of the baser needs at scale. So when we're talking about, like, you know, city size or community size groupings of people, like, because problems scale when people scale. And so it's hubris for us to think, and this is why I don't tell people truths. I just talk about context and perspective, because
when you say that, I think that's a good point, because truth is subjective. You know, truth is very hard to find, and it is fleeting, and it changes all the time. The most truth that people can claim to have today is the truth of science, but the truth of science is always evolving. You know, I think there's only one real fact in this life. There's only one real truth, and that's we are going to die, you know?
Yeah, that's why I brought up the near-death episode, actually, because it's when you are crossing the threshold that is the abyss, the big black, or however you want to look at whatever that represents. Like, all I know is that sometimes when I've crossed over that, I know because I've awoken back to awareness, and I feel like
what is that experience like when you enter the abyss?
It's horrifying, but it's also like you unavoidably become resigned to it, because you can't do anything about it once it starts. And of course you take a personal inventory, which is like, oh shit. And like, so when that was happening, you do have
a sense of horror. You do have a sense of fear when you enter that space.
Yeah, I'll say like, fear or anxiety, like overwhelming anxiety. And it's not despair and it's not despondence, because those are like, you know, I just can't, that's where you're wishing for the abyss. Right. And I need to differentiate, because there's an abyss and then there is death. That's an ultimate change. That's a transfigurative thing. And the abyss is something that's like you go through personal transformations, but you are still cognizant in a certain way. Otherwise it's called schizophrenia.
Now, is this abyss you're speaking of? Is this something that could be accessed through large amounts of psychedelic substances?
Yeah, you can also
separated
do it
from that.
So yes, this is interesting, because I learned about it inversely. I don't remember this, but when I was less than a year old, I had I nearly died from an asthmatic episode. And as I got older, I got put into martial arts as a way to learn how to deal with. Basically, I was learning. I had to teach myself meditation, and martial arts was a way I started to learn about it, because nobody can help you once you're in that state. And so, like, when you are transcending what is normal reality, there's nothing quite like looking at professionals and experts and doctors and people that you hope know the most and how to fix a situation, and they have that bewildered look on their face where they're like, oh fuck, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And you're the one that's like, huh.
Your life's in the balance. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's cool. It's not cool, but it is. It's like a thing, because you're just sort of floating there. And so when I say I learned it inversely, like I was a problem child, because they didn't know what to do with me, because the usual ways they used to kind of like instill fear and like keep us in line in and out of like school or family life and shit like that, like they didn't work on me, because it was just like, oh, there's like, I got a veil pulled off that most people don't. And I'm not trying to sound exceptional. It's just a happenstantial thing.
So
And
you think
so,
that influenced not only your artwork, but kind of how you decided to go about your life? Since you had those near-death experiences as a young child, you kind of have an alternate perspective, and you have an alternate perspective when it comes to all things in your life, including your spirituality and your art.
yeah. And so when I was younger, and I'd like to say it's just when I was younger, but like now it doesn't keep me from being, egomaniacal occasionally or whatever. I get selfish, and that doesn't change. There's this thing that it's like, the enlightenment means that you overcome all this crap. And it's like, sure, but also not like, even Gandhi had his faults, and you name it, like the
I
most
think every
enlightened
man
people.
has their faults. To me, enlightenment is it's not something you necessarily attain. It's a decision you make that you're going to be on this quest. If
Yes, you
you
strive
are
after it
deciding that
your whole.
I'm going to be on this quest for knowledge and wisdom, then you are becoming enlightened. And
Yep.
down the line, once you are on that quest and once you've learned those lessons, people might start referring to you as enlightened if you reflect that in your life and in your actions. But there's no one day you become enlightened and it all stops and you just become a perfected being. I don't believe that.
No, not at all. That's hubris for sure. I feel like, it's funny. I love the name of your podcast, Shaman Vision, because I've gotten the honorary title in this like Telegram group of people that are into like Bitcoin and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I'm the shaman.
you're the
And
shaman.
I
You
didn't ask.
know,
It's
did
but
you ever dig deep into the shaman and the idea of the shaman?
oh yeah, absolutely, I
Yeah,
have.
well, I had somebody, a listener of the podcast, and they were wanting me to explain what shaman was and what shaman vision was. And so let's just take an opportunity to do that real quick right now. Uh, I was deeply like on my quest of learning and growing. I stumbled across, the idea of the shaman in Peru and in the Native Americans and all over the world, basically. Uh, Even though the witch doctors in Africa or whatever are in some sense a shaman, and I was really fascinated, especially when you talk about, because I love the idea of religion and just how it evolved over time. So when you think about the earliest forms of religion and you think about cavemen making paintings and wishing for rain and wishing for animals to hunt, it's like these guys were shamans. They were probably doing psychedelic drugs or whatever, and
Yeah.
as I learned more, I learned that they could what they do is they get into a trance. And when they get in
Yep.
this trance, they can access the so-called spirit world, and they do this through meditation, dance, prayer, drums, psychedelics, whatever. And uh, at that point in my life, when I was a little bit younger, I was experimenting pretty frequently with psychedelics. And when you do psychedelics in the proper way, and when you do them with an intention, you get some really fascinating results. And I felt like I was able to kind of take some of that information I got while I was under the influence of these psychedelics and kind of bring that back into the world through my artwork. And so I kind of
Mhm.
liken myself to a somewhat of a shaman or a modern day shaman. And the idea of shaman vision, when you bring those things together, like when you're able to kind of see beyond the veil, kind of like what you're talking about with those near-death experiences, how you're able to see beyond this illusion we call reality. And a more basic way to explain it would be, I'm sure everybody's familiar with like the third eye or like the third eye vision. Shaman vision is akin to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But what were you
Uh,
saying? Sorry to derail you from what you were saying, man.
no, no, man. It's we're just having a chit chat, and I really respect what you have to say. I want to like, I know what I've gone through, and I love to hear about other people's experiences. So like,
Yeah, well,
uh,
talk to me a little bit more about this blockchain thing.
okay, but I want to comment on something you mentioned. So when I started doing psychedelics, I suddenly mellowed out because I had a missing vocabulary suddenly available for all these previous experiences that made me like, I don't like, um there were I do creative things because like routine in it, like I keep to a routine, mind you, but like routine in the sense of the way we've sold each other on employment and what jobs represent and stuff. I couldn't handle that because I'm not lazy and I have a fucking work ethic. But going out and it's just like, well, this is just what you got to do. I'm like, the fuck does that mean? Like that's not an
Right,
answer.
right.
And so anyway, like it's like, that's what I meant when I learned
When
about it
people
inversely. It's like,
when people buy into
what's that?
shit, when people buy into it, they buy into the system, they buy into a 9 to 5. And you actually are 100% right that people did buy into that system. But when you think about this, because I thought about this deeply, like the idea of being free, like what does being free really mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be a slave to a job. So what's the alternative? Do I become a homeless man? Okay, I don't want to become a homeless man. Do I want to move into the forest, and do I want to build my own house, and do I want to hunt my own food and live that way? Not really. I mean, that sounds like an interesting idea, but
But
having a
that's why
home,
we make
having a
culture, dude. Like, we have civilization, so we don't have to do that shit if
exactly,
we don't want.
exactly. And then, but if you want it's a double-edged sword. If you want
Yeah.
the nice things that come with civilization, you
Right.
have to buy in a little bit. It's hard to avoid.
Yeah, if we go back to this deals with semantics a hell of a lot, which is also like semiotics in the way we use signs and symbols to negotiate meaning. Livelihood is a more important way to look at it, I think, than whether or not it's employment or jobs and stuff. And I realize like discussing it doesn't help feed your kids and stuff like that, or keep a roof over your head and shit. But like that, like we have not thought all of the thoughts that can be thought of. Like by definition, there's an infinite variety, just like on a sphere, there's an infinite surface area. And so within that idea, that means that maybe we haven't figured it out. And there's a plenty of other options in the ways we could possibly do things that aren't just to make somebody else rich at the expense of the one true thing we all have subject to, which is time.
Right.
There's a guy named
Time and happiness,
yes.
man. I said this in the last podcast. It's the only true luxury. It's the only true luxury, man, because you can't buy it.
That dude, that's the great buy-in right there. Is people want you
To
distracted from the fact that, yeah,
100%.
Alfred Korzybski, he's one of the heaviest reads I've ever encountered in my life, and he's not very well known, but he invented this school of thought that's called general semantics. And I'm less concerned with that and more concerned with, he had this idea that he called us time binders. Like time exists because we put it together. It's an interesting concept because like, depending, again, we're back to perspective and subjectivity, which is like, if we're not here to experience it, does time exist? What happened before we knew, like, did we just like, poof into existence?
Well, I
because
think that's the argument of like time exists maybe like on different in different dimensions. Like when we are stuck in this kind of third dimension type of experience, time exists because we die. I think that's why time exists, because our lifespans are so limited. Dude. Yeah,
it's like I like to look at it like it's the figure 8, man. It's the Mobius strip, and what's cool about that shape is it shows scale. It's like a Mobius is a feedback loop, and so that's made up of fractals that are self-similar and non-repeating. And one tiny one is like a giant one, and so like you have that in an infinite amount and variety. And as we like wake up to different parts of it, because like transcendental states are a good example of what it's like to experience those things, which is why people either are like super giddy or they're like, scared to death while
and
it's going on.
You're talking about experiencing like time warps or having a weird relationship with time that you don't normally associate with.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's not like I had this thing I call it. I describe it as retroactive reality, where I was and like I'll spare you, but like I did the math one time on a trip experience I took at a festival, because I can hold like a half a cup of fluid volume in my mouth, and I had a mouthful of liquid acid.
Yeah.
And the micrograms is insane to think about, and it sounds like I'm making it up, but the point is
I want to hear the whole story.
Went to a festival with some friends, and like these guys, it looked like they were just fucking aliens because they were dipping their bare hands into fucking a 5-gallon bucket of liquid LSD with eyedroppers. And they're like, tilt your head back. And I'm like, looking at my friends, and like, I'm not tilting my head back for anyone.
Fuck.
Like, that's chill in my throat. And they're like, it's cool. Finally, okay. And so like, I just get this like gushing mouthful of this shit. And then it's just like, I do that and I look at my friends. I'm like, I got to go back to my campsite. Like,
Now, how long
I
did that trip
proceeded.
last? And tell me about that trip.
It never stopped, but
Are you still in it right
dude,
now?
it's debatable.
That's
Um,
crazy, man.
Dude, I was in like South Missouri in July, and I was in a pair of shorts, and I was frying literally and figuratively because like I passed out in the sun and woke up like a fucking lobster, dude. And so for this, it was over a weekend, okay.
Yeah.
And for like the next 2 days, I was like a golem in the day, going from shade to shade, like a fucking vampire
And
getting
you're
burnt to
still
death.
under the
Like,
influence while you're doing this?
oh, I would walk and there'd be people like in big groups walking and talking and laughing. And then they would all look at me and they would just get fucking quiet and just split.
I
Cause
can
I
only
was in
imagine.
straight up survival mode, dude.
I can
Like
only imagine, man. That sounds pretty
man,
heavy.
I was cartwheeling in and out of trees, dude. I was like a total monkey. I'm not even fucking, uh, it was wild. And one of the things I experienced in that was there was this like stone structure. There was like just like a concession stand, but it was made out of fucking rocks. And I was just like, I had this moment where I was like, we're as old as these rocks, and the rocks are as old as eternity.
Right.
And it was like this, where time started doing this dilation. It was like taffy, where I'm like, how long have we been doing this? And I'm looking at my friends. I'm not saying this out loud. I'm just like, we've been doing this forever. And like, this is what happens. We're the tribe, and the tribe is infinitely large.
Yeah.
And like, it was amazing to see, like, as people stepped into imprint vulnerable states, and like I started to kind of step down out of like fucking survival mode and more into like, oh fuck, I made it. Like,
Right.
almost, you know, like I go at life super hard, and I did that with psychedelics too, and they have a really harsh learning curve, and they deliver. So like,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like for me personally, there's I've done them in very smart ways, and I've done them in very stupid ways, man. And the trips really reflected that. Whenever I took psychedelics with the intent to have a good time and have a good laugh and party and bullshit, I've had unpleasant experiences, and that was only once. I was only one time where I took a substantial dose, and I thought I was gonna have a good time and party, you know. And I learned, and that I have a painting about that trip, and that trip changed me as a man. I was probably 20, it's probably 19 years old, man, and I was kind of like you were talking about, going at life the wrong way, going at life kind of hard, and going at life the wrong way. You know what I mean? And trying to figure out at that point in my life anyway. I think a lot of people's lives, you're trying to figure out who you are and what your purpose is and what your direction is. You know what I mean? So I was just like partying a lot and experimenting with drugs and just associating myself with like crazy groups of people. And it was, I had a trip and I was around these people, man, these girls that like I barely knew, and I'm doing heavy duty psychedelics with them. And it's just like, I'll get into that trip some other time, but I went home and I realized that, it was very crystal clear because I was able to see myself clearly for the first time. I made the mistake of looking in the mirror, and what I seen myself very clearly, and I did not like the man I was becoming. I didn't like the man I was, and it was very clear to me that if I kept on going down the path that I was going down, it was going to have, I wasn't going to like myself. You know what I mean? So from that day on, I reassessed my spirituality. I reassessed my goals in life, and the other trips were, I'm probably weird. I'm one of the few people I know that like to solo trip. I like to be by myself and really
I'm that way as well.
Yeah, I like to really experience my own mind. Because when you're around people, when you're under under the influence of psychedelics, there's so many. It's like a mind melding type of thing, and you're so easily you can pick up on
The
other people's
membrane of
vibes.
individuality gets super fucking fluid, and
Right.
if you're
And
not
so
ready
you
for
don't know
that,
if you're
like,
tripping on your own trip or if you're tripping on somebody else's trip. So it's like I like to like quarantine my own trip. So I know that anything that happens, any feelings I have, any experiences I have, they're all manifesting from my mind. They're not, bleeding in from other people's trips. And that's been really beneficial to me, man. And setting in a tent, I don't condone the use of psychedelics for people that aren't prepared and for people that haven't researched them. But if you are on that quest and that is something you're interested in, definitely do your research and go about the right way.
Yeah, and I don't suggest people cannonball into it. I say like step into the water,
Yeah,
which
for
by
sure.
the way, I have a very fascinating relationship with water when I'm in trance states, because I'll go right up to them, but I won't go swimming. I won't get in the water. It's like, I have this, and I've had this in non-transcendental states where it's just through working out alongside a river over the course of a weekend by myself, where there's like this electrical quality where like water and land meet, that it's like, and I mean like directly electrical, that it's like, I mean, I know there's negative ions that concentrate around water and stuff, but this is like, I don't know. I ultimately, I think.
What's your sign? Could that be related? We were having a astrology talk last podcast. Are you a water sign?
I am a Gemini.
So you're an air
I'm
sign.
an air sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got you. Well, yeah.
Don't life's that recursive, man. I wanted to say, like, whenever you're in that state where you're in like imprint vulnerable and you can't tell like individual versus like collective group. When you're tripping with other people and stuff, and that fluid membrane starts to get a little like, I can't tell what's what. Like in my experience, I definitely am weirding other people out, no matter how that's fucking playing out.
Right.
It's like,
yeah. No, I feel the same way, and I don't like, I've tripped with people a few times, and I've had fun a few times, but it's like, I'm not so much, when I do it, I don't do it so much for fun. You know, when I did realize
same here, dude. I mean,
the idea of the shaman and people that have been using these substances for thousands of years, not just for fun, but to actually explore their minds and explore their, the universe. I decided that, maybe I'm gonna take a more serious approach and see what kind of benefits I get, and the benefits I think were great for me.
Agreed. I did the same thing, actually. I have a proclivity for Salvia divinorum.
That's crazy. See, I've had friends that tried that, and I never fucked with it.
I sat with it like I did other ritual stuff, where I would sit in a comfortable space and I would take it by myself and then just meditate on it, which is disassociative. So it's like I'm not controlling the meditation, but it's taking me through it. I experienced something on it when I was first trying it out that I call the buzzsaw of eternity, where I was like on a table, and it was like the Tool album cover of the Saw Blades by Alex Gray or whatever.
Yeah, Alex Gray's awesome.
It cut through my spine from the bottom up through, and I watched my body vivisect in half. And I'm just kind of like, and my friends are sitting at the table while it's going on.
And what was the deeper message in that you picked up? Was there one?
That we have an infinite, I don't know, aperture for experience, dude. I don't know how else to say that.
No, I feel you. Salvia is one of one of the psychedelics that never interested me because I've heard the stories, man. But I've heard wild stories of people smoking that and like living in their trips, living other lives, being like like setting up, like living in another life for 2 months. It feels like, an extended amount of time.
Salvia does not play nice. It is one of the least playful of the transcendental experiences. I experienced one the first time. I had a group, 3 of my friends and I were sitting in a room, and we tripped on it. I forget. It was like an ADX or something. It was a substantial amount, but 2 of us, we were sitting perpendicular in pairs. And like we smoke it, and we're just kind of hanging out, chit chatting, and we have a lot of psychonautic experience between us all. So it's like not like our first time at the rodeo, but suddenly, like I'm sitting on a futon next to my friend, and the room turns 90 degrees sideways, and I'm so convinced it's real. I'm gripping this futon, afraid to fall on my friend. And then as I'm looking around, all 4 of us are like gripping for something because the room's turning.
Yeah.
And then it goes from that to like a brick in a wall, where I'm literally just like the pair of eyes behind you, but I'm brick in a wall, just looking back and forth, and I'm screaming, but there's no sound, because like it's like if you had an itch, but you're bound. Right. It was like that, where it's like I've been like, oh my God, this is fucking horrible.
Well, I think, man, when we start talking about the mind melding that happens during, when you're under the influence of psychedelics, it makes you really question and think about what is consciousness, because you kind of grow up and think that consciousness is all in here and it's all yours, but when you have experiences like that, it makes you think that maybe consciousness is more of like a frequency that we're tapped into
Oh yeah,
as
it's totally
opposed
non-local.
to yeah, totally like a non-local thing that we kind of tap into, as opposed to just something that we just kind of, it's in us and we own. And I wanted to talk to you about this, the idea of the collective consciousness. And I want to bring this up because there's a painting right here, you can't really see that well, it's on a mirror, and I've been working on this painting for like a little bit over a year, not consistently, but working on it. And it's the idea of it's the Christ, or a Christ-like figure, and the face is a mirror. And the idea behind it was for people to see divinity in themselves, and they look at this painting, they can see the divine in them, and they can see themselves as a reflection of the divine. And I was scrolling on Twitter some time back, and I seen that it really just it really made me laugh and made me think. I seen an image of some artwork or something that you made where it was the Baphomet and a mirror was incorporated, and I was like, wow. I mean, because here I am thinking that I'm some fucking creative genius or something, and I'm the first person to ever think to put, associate a mirror with some type of spiritual significance, and here you are, and you do almost the exact same thing, only it's kind of on the different opposite end of the perspective or of the spectrum. And I wanted to talk to you about that particular piece, and I wanted to talk to you about your idea of collective consciousness.
Okay. I recognize the piece of yours that you're describing. I forget that you had that on exhibit somewhere, I think, because like
I haven't shown it yet. It's still a work in progress. I probably
really?
have put I haven't shown it yet. Not the mirror
Man,
piece.
I feel like I have memories of that piece. Like, well, all
I've
right.
shown
So
you. I think I've shown you a
there's
picture.
my comment on collective consciousness. Like, I feel like I've already seen it. Like, and not
I'm pretty sure you
not
have.
in
I think I sent you a picture of it.
And just for levity here, you're actually forming a Baphomet right now because of the eyebrows coming out of your head. And
I've noticed
the line
that.
where the red and green meet.
Yeah.
So
I've noticed that while I was sitting here. This is my first time shooting this podcast in this position, so it's a lot of news.
It's great, dude. It's great.
Right
So I'll lead into the Baphomet discussion this way. I've done this a couple of times over. I did this several years ago, which is, it's a ritual operation that's called Liber Samek. So this is through the AA. So it's the Astron Argon, or Argentum Astrium, Argentium Astrans, however you want to look at it, which is like part of the OTO is a part of the AA. It's like this. It's called brotherhood.
These are basically like fraternities, or you wouldn't want to call them cults, but sub religions, right?
Sure, yeah. They're so Baphomet is a code word by the Knights Templars because they were foot soldiers for the Catholic Church. They were hired as soldiers, and what happened was the church, the Inquisition, got what they wanted out of them, and they started discovering that they were worshiping Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, and so they started murdering them as heretics, burning them to death and stuff. So they started calling.
What is your opinion on that? Because I've dug into the Knights Templar, and I guess the theory is right. They were an army hired by the church, the Catholic Church, and the theory I've heard, and you could tell me what you think about this, is that they went into the Holy Land, they went to Jerusalem, and they had shelter in this temple, and that underneath it was a far more ancient temple, and they were digging underneath this temple, and they happened to find some type of object of spiritual or religious significance, and that kind of changed their course and gave them some type of wisdom or power, and in turn they became money lenders, and they started creating their own rituals, and that's kind of how they became so powerful that they ended up needing to be murdered on Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a really close friend that's he's in an older generation, but they left a bunch of stuff out of the generations before you and I, out of the literature because of religious preferences. And it's fascinating because he is a Knights Templar by blood. He's in a lineage of it. He's Cajun, but he lives up in Missouri now. But we had discussions when I was out on campus and stuff for like hours at a time. And this is fascinating because I think this was connected to, this was as much had to do with, I received the title of master from him. Like, no bullshit. It was in front of his martial arts class he was leading. And I laughed out loud when he pronounced me as that, because I didn't know how to fucking respond to that, because I don't actually buy that. But the reason why that came about is we were discussing this stuff. Because he is a 32nd degree Master Mason that was tasked with going back through all of the rites, busted down to entered apprentice, which is how you attain to the 33rd rite, or the 33rd degree in the Scottish rite. And I am, it's fascinating also, both my grandfathers are Freemasons, but I refuse to pay dues for anything. I'm not a subscription guy. I will just seek out the...
Are you associated with the fraternity, or are you just a man like me that seeks their own knowledge and finds what they do interesting, but not wanting to associate themselves or pay a subscription or do any of their rituals?
It's a fascinating conversation, because I would be considered formally as a Cowan, so somebody that has the knowledge that is not in the order. But I have friends that are legitimately in the order that I have referenced myself as such, and they were like, they correct me. They're like, "You've received the knowledge, so you need to stop saying that." And that's fascinating. I played music at a Grand Lodge out in Salina, Kansas, where we stayed there overnight. It was donated for art purposes and shit. And it had like a 1,000-seat theater on like the 6th floor of this building. That was like, it was fucking amazing, dude. And I can't remember if you went to the place that I used to live at in St. Joe, but there was a house I rented that at this point is like 125 years old, that has original woodwork, and it was built by Freemasons. It had almost the exact same layout as this Grand Lodge out in Kansas, but
really?
Like down. And I dug into the crawl space for reasons I don't know. I'm just curious, but I climbed in the crawl space of this house, and I found by the original Masons that built the house, and I still have them, I found a stylus that they used to write out their math, and I found a copy of Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. I couldn't copyright date it because the front had been torn up, but I kept it and put it away.
And this conversation is great, and I have a lot of questions. First thing I want to bring up, and these are going to be kind of complicated questions. First thing I want to bring up is Albert Pike was a very, very important figure in Freemasonry, right?
Yeah, but I find him to be one of the least important in a certain sense when it comes to the actual...
I agree. When you talk about the whole lineage of Freemasonry that extends, you know, beyond the Knights Templar or whatever, but he has become an important figure in some of the more modern incarnations of it, because he did write the Morals and Dogma. Yeah. And he was also a member of the Klan.
Yes, he was also a Confederate general.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to get that off. I mean,
no. I understand. I don't like.
It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to make that point, because there's Black Masons as well. And yes, if we're gonna break it down, the Masonry tradition comes from Africa, and that's pretty much a fact. It does. Yeah. And so does a lot of the ritual magic and all that comes from Africa. But I have to ask a question. This we're speaking of the Masons. This is not a Freemasonic symbol. These are two switchblades with a J and the S in the middle. Kind of represent my own thing, but
that's cool.
I can't help but notice the big eye and the triangle enveloped in flames. And then so we're talking about Freemasonry, and that is a symbol a lot of people will associate with the Illuminati. What do you think do you think the rumors of the Masons playing a role in the shadow government, do you think that's substantial, or do you think that's a myth and a misdirection?
It's both.
Yeah,
it's both.
That's a wise answer. Yeah.
I'd like to say this. I'm not defending Albert Pike, but he did promote a Native American into general, and I think also a Black man. I cannot think of their names, but like you can look that up and correct me if I'm wrong about that. But
I'm not going to give him too much credit for that. But it's not important. It's not important. But what does that symbol behind you represent? Is it the Eye of Horus, or what is it?
Yeah. I look at it like the Eye of Horus, which just deals with transcendental knowledge. It's seeking justice, but also the cause of one's ignorance, which I don't know that those two things are separate.
Okay. I've also heard of that symbol, that's also on the back of your $1 bill. I've also heard that associated with the Eye of Lucifer. Do you have any knowledge of that as a person that is pretty deep into the occult?
People
or is
like
that a
to
myth?
put
Is that a myth?
I mean, people also like to claim Baphomet is the devil. So like it's a myth and not a myth. It's a theory that's out there. I don't subscribe to most of the things, I guess. I don't even know how to approach parts of this topic because
well, I'm asking you because you have more inside knowledge than I do, because I studied the occult, and I wanted to know more about it, and I figured out as much as I wanted to, and I figured out that wasn't, as deep as it goes, that wasn't for me. I have, my quest is somewhere else, you know what I mean? But when I hear these type of things and you read these type of things, I always wanted to ask somebody like you that is, an insider, what, do these things represent the things people say they do?
I guess it's in the eye of the beholder. Pardon the pun. I didn't intend that. Just like I didn't intend it. The background is just above my bed. I have to be sitting here.
I think there's like 3 eyes. If you combine these screens, you got 3 eyes floating around.
Hey man, like that's perfect chaos.
I get it. It because it gets complicated, because symbols are very powerful and they encode a lot of information. But the beautiful thing about them is they also can be subjective, and they also can be used in different ways. A perfect example of that is the swastika. The swastika is a very ancient symbol used by Native Americans and Indians from India, and it had no connotations of hate whatsoever associated with it. It was more of a symbol of the sun. But when it gets associated by somebody like Hitler and the Nazis, it becomes a completely negative symbol. So symbols are funny like that.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid appropriation once it happens. Like I respect the Gadsden flag, the original American flag that was made out of hemp with the snake on it that says "Don't tread on me."
It's a beautiful flag. I want to make a shirt about it. Yeah.
Well, apparently that has been appropriated by right-wing extremist fuckheads. So
yeah, I've heard the same thing. I don't care, because I will appropriate that shit right back. You know what I'm saying? I'll rock that shit right back, because you can't take that. You can have the rebel flag. I'll let them have that flag. If you wanna wave that as a sign of Southern pride or racism, you could have it. But you're not gonna take "Don't tread on me."
Yeah. So
that's independent.
That's how I don't think I'm an insider on any of this. I got kicked out of a magical fraternity. So
you're not an insider. Now, can I ask why, or is that a personal situation?
Hubris penetrates everywhere, and I'm an endless seeker. And so because I refuse to, I don't know, I think I just rub people the wrong way sometimes. And so what I've done is suspend judgment. There's a book called the Lankavatara. It's a Mahayana Buddhist text, but it's very not well known, even amongst Mahayana Buddhists. I met some from Tibet, and I brought it up to them, and they didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. It's just a book that's the Buddha talking to a disciple about how basically there's being, non-being, and then this other state that's beyond those things. And everything else is a bunch of bullshit, and it's the Buddha being tongue-in-cheek with these so-called enlightened characters, trying to mistaking the map and the territory. And I'm actually quoting Korzybski again with that. The map is not the terrain. And so what I've done is suspend judgment. And so I've done a bunch of rituals of all kinds. And I'm not saying anybody needs to subscribe to this, but from my experiences, angels and demons don't really exist. They're concepts that we have cooked up for the sake of comprehension of processes that are beyond the scope of our understanding.
So are you thinking it's a purely psychological thing? Is that your point of view? Because I think me and you can both agree that there is a yin and a yang, and a lighter and a darker side of life, right?
Oh, for sure, yes.
Okay.
And that's where
but you don't believe that there are entities or different types of energies that manifest these lighter energy, or more positive energies and more negative energies. You think that it is just
for sure they do.
Okay, so
So
couldn't you think that that's what people refer to as angels and demons? These entities that bring either positive or negative energy.
yeah, it's like it's collective consciousness stuff again, but it's also collective unconscious. Like, so I'll give you an experience I had, and what I was talking about with this a ritual operation. I did this for 3 months solid several years ago. This would have been like when we were first starting to meet on campus and stuff. And then I repeated the ritual last year, and it's like I did it for an entire year, every day, repeatedly for an entire year. That's how it's supposed to be done. But I did a 3-month version of it years prior, and I was staying in a trailer outside of Amazonia, Missouri when I was doing this, and I had a room dedicated to it. And I'm very when I do ritual magic, which is Western magic and my own amalgamation of stuff, because I also have Eastern background and shit from martial arts, blah, 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 blah. But when I would sit and do ritual magic, and still, why I like Mahayana ideas, it means mind only, right? I don't need a bunch of window dressing. I don't need fancy robes. I don't need magic stones or tools or whatever. I'm not trying to shit on anybody's preferences. I just think it's all from here, because when you start to lose oxygen and stuff, everything goes right back to this thing. Everything else is fucking subsidiary to whatever is going on in this fucking encephalon we each have. And so basically I would do this ritual every day repeatedly. And as that was going on, 2 things happened, okay? It's really interesting how this plays out, because I also don't buy into aliens. But I shit you not, dude. I came home from working at twilight one night. I was body piercing. I came home from work, and so I was sober. I get out of my car and I go to walk to my trailer, and I'm looking at my feet, and as I look up, there's this like 4 foot tall approximately creature that looks like it's made up of a suit of jigsaw puzzle pieces with like a glowing sheet over it. It's not glowing, but it's translucent. It has hematite colored eyes. So, but it's not gray. It's like brown or blue. It's like nondescript in those color ranges. And like it stopped me in my tracks. I'm not a superstitious person, okay? I call it stupidstition. I think that's where people lose their shit. It's just like the conversation's over because like that's devilry or whatever their thing is. And so I suspend judgment. I saw this thing. It sees me, and we have this like conversation that's not a conversation. It's just like quiet for it's brief, and just like, well, all right then. And that's what I said. Like I'd say that, and I kind of nod, and I walk into my trailer beside it, and that's it. That was that experience. Now, that was during this ritual operation. Excuse me. And another day, this was in the daytime, I did this, and this in the jargon is called knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Okay. So what happened was I was sitting before my altar facing east, and in this room, this like, it looked like it was made out of like medieval Scottish armor, like a kilt, but it was armor. And it was this being made of golden light that came through the ceiling and the wall and appeared before me, and it had wings. They were so large, it pierced both sides of the trailer I was in. And it presents itself before me, and then it floats above me and rotates, and then subsumes my body. It comes down over me, and that's the experience of that.
Wow. That's the hell of a story right there, man.
That's I'm not making any of it.
No, that's a hell of an experience.
I saw it with my wide open eyes, and I don't take easy to like, I'm not able to be hypnotized. People cannot, I've had people try it. It's not work. And not because I'm trying not to make it work. It's just something about the way my mind works won't allow for it. And so this thing was just very.
Do you think it was possible that you were manifesting what some would call a demon?
I don't think it was if demons are benevolent.
So what information or what guidance or aid did this entity give you?
Like I'm still figuring that out. Just that, like we were part of the same process is what I gathered from it. And the thing is like a lot of this shit has to do with control and bewilderment. People are seeking control. And what it taught me really, and the same thing with like, and that's why I bring up this alien or other at the same time in the discussion, because it's like, it's like everything's figuring it out. Nothing has it figured out. I've had a transcendental experience where I experienced omnipresence, and I'm not shitting you either. I experienced omnipresence, and you know what happens when that goes on? It's overwhelming.
It's a light. It just, if you're talking about the same thing I'm talking about that I've experienced, omnipresence for me was I got into a state where it was just pure white and blue light, and it was an overwhelming sensation of positivity, of love, and that every single thing, not only on this earth but in the universe, is connected and working together.
Yeah, and you know, when I experienced something similar, it was immediately, and I mean immediately, followed by nausea. I was puking in a trash can, and I was laughing. It was on video. I was laughing while I was vomiting because it was so joyous. It was crazy, man. But I don't mean to get so derailed with that.
I find that stuff very interesting, man. I think that's cool. I mean, I think it's interesting that you partook in that extended ritual and that something did manifest. That's wild, man. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, and like to some, that's like violating rules because, but the deal is like secrets don't really exist.
Here's the thing, man. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story, and I appreciate you being open. And this whole podcast is about being open-minded and being open and sharing ideas with people that have different ideas than you. And it's okay that you think the way you do and I think the way I do. We can still sit down here and have a cordial conversation and have fun and build dialogue and build a connection. You know what I mean? This is a platform for people to come together no matter how they go about perceiving this life and living this life. Yeah.
And so again, thanks for the opportunity to just hang out here a little bit, because this stuff's important that we have these discussions without like telling each other what's right and wrong.
Right. Because, without judgment.
Yeah. And so those things, like, that could have just as easily been the unconscious speaking through allegory. Just like the Baphomet is an anthropomorphization of the stuff we're discussing.
Right.
Like, and the year-long ritual, like, that's all this stuff in the jargon again is intense and personal. So it's like, I can only give you bits and pieces of it, and that's not a.
No, you don't. That's
one thing I really don't.
Yeah, you don't have to give me the details of it. I just appreciate you telling me the story and kind of the outcome of that, all that work you put in. Let's get back to that piece you made about with the mirror and the Baphomet. Well, you said that was actually that was a ritual item. Didn't you say that?
Oh yeah. So the mirror was okay. So I made a drawing that's in a frame. It's a golden frame, but it's a plastic golden frame. It's just something I scavenged, and I gessoed it and then painted Baphomet on it. And it's probably like 3.5 feet tall by 2 feet wide or something. It's sizable. And then there's a mirror that covers the Baphomet except for the head. And so I sat that on the floor during this year-long ritual, and I did my ritual before that. And I sat in lotus, so Padmasana, in front of it. And so what it was an exercise in overcoming the ego and the self, while also like whatever else is, on the menu.
So was that part of the ritual, or was that something you did in preparation for the ritual?
That was consistently part of the ritual. Now, mind you, that ritual required that I did it everywhere, whatever was going on in life, because it's like you do one part for 1 lunar cycle, and then you do it twice for 2 lunar cycles, thricely for 3 lunar cycles, and 4 times, and then it's just like you're just doing it all the fucking time. And like if you're really gonna do it, I started it several times over the years, and it's just like, oh man, I'm tired. I'm not doing that.
Isn't it dangerous and after a while, it's not complete rituals?
What's that?
Isn't it dangerous to not complete a ritual?
So yes, it can be. And again, this gets into like one's belief set as far as what superstition represents. So like another name for this ritual would be like the Abramelin operation. And Aleister Crowley notoriously started it and didn't complete it. And there are people that think that like it wrecked his fucking life.
Right.
So again, like I tend to just kind of disregard all of when I do this stuff, I read source material on it. So I read people's experiences that did it instead of speculation, and I go do my own fucking research. I think theory and practice are really fucking important to have together. I'm sorry I'm cussing so much.
No,
but,
you're good, man. What can I ask you what your intention was for this ritual?
Just to see what the outcomes were.
See what the outcome was?
I didn't want to focus on results. I just wanted to see what happened. Like, I didn't get into like Aiki Jiu-Jitsu with any particular intention. I just knew that it was fun to grapple with people, and there was a lot to learn, and it could be really cool and dynamic. And what's crazy is it became synergistic with percussion. I learned how to when I learned how to play odd times as a drummer, and I started martial arting, and I'd move in odd rhythm. It's called broken rhythm in, martial arts, but like, I did this a couple of times sparring with people. This is kind of like, seems like it's a non sequitur, but it directly relates. Like, people get used to this, like, you go, I go kind of rhythm with, fighting and stuff like that, or just back and forth sporting stuff. And so I was sparring with two different people on different occasions where, like, we were having a really spirited back and forth. It was respectable, but like really fucking aggressive. And I stopped in the middle of it and just walked at them like Jason or Michael Myers, where they did a slow walk. I did that in the middle of a real heated sparring session, and both those people clammed up and didn't know what to fucking do. And they were really, really good practitioners.
Right.
And it just like unlocked something for me.
When you break the rhythm, when you break kind of that cycle and that rhythm, people don't know how to handle it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And it's fascinating because you can extrapolate that to anything. And like, so it taught me that there aren't really rules, like, it seems so obvious that that's the case, but we have to, like, it's like we have this amnesia. We have to, like, remind ourselves that, like, oh, it's constantly adjustment.
Right.
And so, like,
Constant
that's what the ritual stuff's about. Yeah. And so it's like, I have my own mantras and stuff like that, where it's like that, whatever that creature, that being that's a part of myself, but also I like maybe has a separate existence of its own. Like, it gave me a name that I won't give you because that's intense and personal, but like, you have one with whatever that thing represents for you. Everybody does. It's like this thing that's as much who you are as who, James is to you, that sort of thing. Like,
that's really fascinating, man. That's really fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, man. That's wild. I'm gonna have to take a minute to wrap my mind around that. Let's talk about blockchain for a second, because I know you are a guy that is kind of on the forefront, or one of the guys that's really on the forefront, especially in my limited circle of people I know. And I'm aware, I've had conversations with people and they say that's where we're headed to in the future. And I don't know too much about it. I haven't took out any time in my life to do any research. So I was hoping that you could give me a basic breakdown, and hopefully the listeners a basic breakdown of what this is and how it's going to be enacted in the future.
This is great, dude. We're like so on the same page here. I was just about to go back to the blockchain. So I'll toss out a couple of things. I'm pretty much a techno dullard. So like it's like everything else. I'm interested. I just want to experience stuff. I want to see what's out there. So, and I might throw out some opinion for people that know anything about it, that they're just going to be like, oh, this guy's so fucking duped. Like, but blockchain in and of itself is just like a way to connect a lot of transactions electronically. So it's not like Bitcoin is a blockchain. Okay. It's not a money. It is a protocol that is a way to keep record of interactions and exchanges. So like, basically there's this thing that's a block. Miners have to brute force an algorithm through computers to discover the block. And once they find it, then they can start putting stuff into it, and then they get a block reward. They get paid to do that. And I might have, like, there'd be people that are like, that's not how that works. Like, I could just give you basic ideas on how this goes together. So I'm not an expert by any means. And by the way, people that call themselves experts are a subject. Like, they're suspect.
No,
like,
for sure.
Everybody's a researcher.
For sure.
But so blockchains, like, let's say, like, you did a bunch of online transactions in various ways. Like you paid for stuff, but you also are just doing stuff like streaming YouTube content, stuff like that. They're all in blocks, and that's how you receive them. And you can also layer money on top of that, like payment. And that's what Bitcoin represents. And so blockchain is like a way to introduce accountability. And there's this like just horseshit of a discussion that's going on of people that want to tell you one thing and lie to you because they have a vested interest in scamming and making money. And so there's all this, it's like what's going on with politics and everything else, where there's double speak all over the place and people will tell you whatever you want to hear just to get you to give something up. And so there's this huge debate right now that's getting really interesting because it involves real life court and people's lives and technology. And there's this guy that claims that he invented Bitcoin. His name's Craig Wright. And people have just lambasted him for years now. And what's coming to be known is that he more than likely really is this character called Satoshi Nakamoto that invented Bitcoin. And that's
Shit. 'Cause that was a big mystery for a long time, right?
Yes, and there are people right now that probably just they'll probably just tune this out because they're like, oh, fuck this guy. But so what's interesting is Craig Wright has a business partner. He claims that he and like 3 other people were Satoshi Nakamoto, and what is accurate and whether or not that's actually true, this other stuff is true. Craig Wright's uncle and his grandfather were and himself, they are cybersecurity experts. Like they are at the top fucking tier of cybersecurity. Sorry, you meant Kitty. That's Maya. She's always trying to be in this. But Craig Wright's granddad, just for the bona fides, he was his boss was General George MacArthur's right hand. Okay, he traveled around with him, and they were code crackers that changed the course of fucking human history by cracking like Japanese military codes and stuff like that in World War II.
So where is this blockchain going to take us in the future, you think?
Okay, well, I'm sorry for all this like biography about this character because this deals with blockchain, which is the Bitcoin that Craig Wright has is a protocol based on the original white paper that is what blockchain deals with, where it's like you have this ledger that like basically there's a ledger everybody writes in, all your business, everything that you do, like your medical stuff, all that stuff's on this blockchain, but it makes it too expensive for nefarious activities. So people that want to keep separate books and cook books and do criminal activities like human trafficking, drug trade, shit like that, they cannot. Go ahead.
It'll all be accounted for, is what you're saying. Everything, any transaction,
yes.
any money changing hands will all be accounted. You can see where it's all going.
Yeah, so there's this thing where people want to argue about privacy versus anonymity. And like, I, as a default person, I got into Bitcoin and blockchain because I had interest in philosophy and chaos science. It was crazy how it overlapped because, oh man, this is so like, you have to talk about everything to talk about parts of this. And that's why like a lot of people don't want to get into it because it's overwhelming. But the deal is it's going to change the way society is operated. Like this will like corporations want to be entities as people, right? That's like they'll get what they want, like they've gotten it, and that means that they're also on the blockchain and their shit's visible. So
they'll be held accountable for all the money and all the transactions, and it'll be less
it'll
likely
make government
for people
honest whether or not they want to be. Like
that's awesome, man. That makes a lot of sense, and that makes me kind of proud to see that be enacted. We have a mutual friend. He's my uncle, but he's a good friend of yours, and he is really concerned with the idea of internet privacy and the amount of our data being sold and how we are going to pretty much in the very near future have some type of data breach where all our data is out there to be accessed by, a certain amount of people at any time. What do you think about that, man?
It's a legitimate concern. I operate under the auspices that like if the powers that be want it, they've had it the whole time.
Right.
Like any of this technology we've got was disseminated after they knew what they wanted out of it, and then we got it secondarily.
Yeah.
And so with that doesn't really change the fact, like that doesn't mean we get to know what they're going to do with it. So like, let's say like I don't have any. I'm going to use China as an example, but I'm not anti-China. It's just like the U.S. and China are two really big, powerful entities that have similar interests, but also dissimilar interests. So like there was a, not too long ago, actually, there was a disruption that had to do with a, what do they call this thing? Where like they overload the network. So like everything gets disrupted. And so like that was going on, and they thought that it was coming from China to just fuck with US interests as far as like regular business stuff. But I think it was actually something like some issue with T-Mobile or something. So like this shit gets really, really hairy because it's hard to tell who's doing what. And that's why things like these blockchains that, and I should say, whenever it's like visible for everybody, that doesn't mean that like I could go look at your medical records. It's like all that stuff still, like you have to get access to that. You have to have a reason to be looking at it.
Right.
But it is available. It's just like the deal is you have a thing where you would have to get, if you wanted to rewrite the books, you would have to get, and this deals with privacy too. Okay. So this is a security issue. So if you wanted to let's say somebody wanted to pay you and I as miners of these data transactions that become blockchain, to put false information in onto the blockchain, which would work against our interests getting paid to do so, they would have to pay like 1,000 of us at once to do it. So they would have to get 1,000 characters all over the world to go against their own interests. And that's why it will fail, because, and the thing is, they couldn't bomb data centers to make it go away because it's non-local. So like you could bomb everything on the planet back to the Stone Age and it would still exist.
So when do you see this blockchain becoming like a part of day-to-day life for the average American citizen?
That I can't answer. It's happening right now.
Or
like
in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Do you have a guess?
Oh, dude, it's already happening. It's just like there's what I'm kind of seeing is that there's going to be there'll be different blockchains, but they will all be on the blockchain that is called Bitcoin, because like there's a real one, and then there are a bunch of others that are scam coins that are ways for people to make money off of gambling and other shit. And so there's man, this stuff's like, man, we are in an exciting time to be alive.
We are, man. Like, 2020 is the mark of a new beginning. I think, man. I think there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of positive change. I think, honestly, man, you're talking about chaos, and we're talking about maybe if the whole situation with the virus and the protests could have been some type of form of controlled chaos for other people to reorganize and gain some type of leverage. But, I honestly believe at the end of the day, the only battle we face is a spiritual battle. And I believe that, if us human beings can really come together and really form a stronger bond and really get on the same page, man, we could really see the future be a lot brighter than our past, man. I 100% believe in that. So I appreciate you spitting this knowledge and spitting this game, man. I got one more question I want to ask you, and then I want you to finish what you're saying about blockchain, and I want you to talk about your band Deviator. Sound good, man? All right. So are you familiar with Elon Musk?
Yeah.
With the Tesla and all that, and he has, and I'm sure you've seen the podcast. I ask everybody this question, right? They put the chip in the back of your head, and it's supposed to give you, Bluetooth capabilities and help you if you have some type of dysfunctions, right?
The Neuralink.
Yeah, Neuralink. How do you feel about that, and would you be down to get that implanted in you?
I want to ask you about Starlink, the satellites he's put.
Dude, he's a different type of guy. He's a definite genius. And dude, the people are going out in space. You said you don't believe in aliens or anything, but Americans are definitely trying to not even Americans, human beings are trying to colonize space, and they're trying to set up bases there for sure.
I'll say this: if aliens exist, they're us in another form, and it's like we're going to remember something about it, and then it suddenly will be okay to know it. Like a more advanced form. It's like ancient civilizations that like came and went and are going to remind us or something. But on Neuralink,
No,
you aren't putting a chip in me, buddy. Like now, it's not like that. I'm,
no,
you know what? I'm ready.
It's
Give me
sketchy.
the Terminator body, dude. Give me my Terminator body. Like if I can get rid of this meat suit that has aches and pains and shit and
Right.
acne and whatever the fuck else.
I think that's where it's going. And I probably won't be alive to see it, but like we're melding with machine more and more every day. Our phone is all but inside of us.
Right.
You know what I mean? Our phone's all but like a physical part of our body.
Dude, those are like, we have monoliths, but they're the size of our fucking palms.
Dude, and you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
Have you seen the sequel, dude?
No.
Like the sequel is also Arthur C. Clarke. He wrote
Kubrick didn't direct it though, did he?
No, but dude, I spent so much time avoiding it, and I watched it here a while back. It's a continuation of the first story from 2001.
It can't be
fucking amazing, dude.
Is it really?
It is amazing.
Oh, that makes me happy to hear, because that movie, like, speaking of psychedelics, I've watched that on Psychedelics, man, and whoa,
right.
That movie is a work of genius. And the monolith is so fucking real. I just turned the phone on, but it's so fucking real, man. You look at your phone, you look at your fucking TVs, man, it's everywhere. So
the sequel's called 2010, the year we made contact.
Now,
dude, I can't.
When was it made?
Like, when was the first one made? Like
late 60s. Late 60s.
Yeah, okay. So the other one was like 70, maybe 70, 70s, I think.
Okay, and it wasn't Kubrick that directed it.
No, but it stars Roy Scheider, that was the star in Jaws. He does a good job of it. But it tells you, like, it gives you the background on what's going on with the monoliths.
That's dope, man. If it comes highly recommended from you, I'm going to check it out.
It ends on a very positive note. And that's like why I got into some of this technological discussion. Miss Kitty, get the cat. Because it's like, it's easy to expect that, you know, like, life teaches me that usually the worst case scenario is what actually is playing out. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm still going to strive towards betterment for everybody, including myself.
Definitely.
And so on the Neuralink thing, there are parts of that I'm like, hell yeah. But there's a lot of it that's like, man, look at what we do with technology right now. That's like, you know, as we're doing this interview, like, you know, packets kind of get fucked up where it's like there's this delay in the signal and shit, and it's like, oh, we got a long ways to go before I'm letting anybody put a chip that fucks with my like neural.
Dude, man,
if anybody's doing that, it's me.
It's some heavy duty shit, but I'm convinced that humans are on their way to putting themselves and machines together. And even with the idea of like artificial intelligence, man, when you look at like YouTube, or you look at Netflix, or you look at your social media feed, all that's being directed by algorithms, by computers. You know, computers are really becoming more and more the masterminds. It's only a matter of time before these algorithms start figuring out who's the next president, who's the next.
Oh yeah, if it's not already.
Who's the next guy? Who's the next leader? Who's the next whatever? It's only a matter of time, man.
I think we're still a long ways away from what people are calling quantum machines, though. Like quantum computers work off of something that is similar to maybe or fuzzy logic, where it's like not a 1 or a 0, it's a yes, no, and maybe. It's those states, or like 0 and 1. And so like you have like it's like how the Hegelian triad works, where you have a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis of those things. And so when you have that triad, you have infinite variation in a finite space. So it's like Turing completeness. Alan Turing is a computer fucking genius from like the 40s or something. And there's this thing called Turing completeness that's like whether or not you can have an infinite tape for processing. And so it goes back to Craig Wright again, where he clarifies that like it's Bitcoin is not infinite but unbounded. So basically, it's like a tape that never ends, even though like it's so large, it doesn't matter that it's not infinite. And so like that's kind of how things work with chaos, where like what we call chaos in the jargon of chaos science is called turbulence, which is where you get into this modes of chaotic states where it's like when things are periodic and they're predictable, and then they go into these aperiodic states where it's like you have to wait for it to calm back down to make sense of it. And so quantum machines function on a similar premise, but we're not yet far enough along to make sense out of how all that shit works. And so the idea that like, Silicon Valley has got this figured out, it's like, no, like in the past 5 years, I finally got an Apple device, and it's got its merits, but it's also kind of like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I just don't know. So I don't have much.
The thing is, people are definitely working on it, though. And that's the interesting thing about mankind is when mankind gets his mind set on something, we are pretty good at accomplishing it. And when you kind of look at the trajectory of where human beings are going with technology, we keep on, it comes back to that materialism thing. It's like a feedback loop because we want to create the next better thing because we can sell it, right? We can make money off it. And then the competitors are going to make the next better thing because they can sell it and make money off it. So it becomes this weird feedback loop that's based off of kind of like materialism, where people are constantly improving things until they,
that's the great
forever,
dude.
until it's over, until, another flood happens or asteroid hits and there's only fucking 5 survivors. And
there's a scalar event.
They don't call them the Atlanteans, they call them the Americans. And they come out with their iPhones and they spread their knowledge on these tribal communities.
Right.
In 3020. Dude, tell me about your band, Deviator. Let me know like how you guys formed and what's the ethos behind that.
So Deviator's 4 members now. 2 of us, the other's Travis Kirshner. He knows Tommy, and we've worked together for about 13 years. I don't know what's wrong with him. He's stuck around working with me that long. I'm incorrigible and intolerable. But we do, our ethos is we do whatever we want. Like we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Like we still play with traditional instruments. I played drums in the group for about 10 years, and I don't know. When certain things happen and you get fed up with enough parts of life, you sort of like adjust your mode. And I took over playing guitar and started singing in the group in the past like 3 years or so.
So you're doing the vocals on that track you sent me. You did the vocals on it.
There are 3 of us doing vocals in that.
No shit. Okay.
Yeah. Parts of it are me. I forget. It doesn't really matter. I do some of the vocal on stuff. You can once you get used to it, you can tell who's doing what. I used to be like really reserved. Like I had a hard time playing guitar and singing. It was easier to play drums and sing, but I just preferred not to. But I just kind of got into a mode where I wanted to emote my own stuff, and I got tired of feeling like I was scared to get out and do it. And so I was like, fuck this. I'm just going to go out and fuck it up until I get it right.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, I'll have a good time. So like part of the ethos is take the risk. Like we go out and we take risks live. We don't play cover material. I think in 13 years, we've done like 3 covers. I'm not shitting. Like it's all original. It's, and it's not like pat on the back for that. It's just like, we want to be authentic and do our own thing.
Definitely.
I like live music. I want to go out and see people take a risk live. I want them to do something I haven't heard, even if it's a song I really like, the way they did it in the like recordings and stuff. And if they screw it up, cool. Like what you'll find is audiences want you to take the risk. And even if it falls apart, if you laugh about it and pick it back up, they're actually more diehard. Like they're right along with you. Yeah. Because like, hey, like what?
It's a show. It's a show. It becomes more of a show. Dramatic. It's drama.
So you have people, and it's like, if people are like, well, that sucked, and it's like, well, here you go. Here's a microphone. Are you gonna do it?
Word,
and some people are ballsy enough, but usually they're like, well, I would, but like, yeah, that's always the thing. Everybody's ready to, but they never quite get there.
Right.
So like, that's the thing. We just kind of get together and do it. Like 2 of us are in Kansas City and 2 of us are in Maryville, and we make it work every week. Like we might only get together like once or twice a week, because it's real life, and like we all have obligations, but we still do it, and we work non-locally, so the technology helps.
Yeah.
But mostly it's just a lot of chit chat. When we get together, it's like we get a lot done, and we have jam sessions. Like I've played in blues bands and stuff. I enjoy jams, but like after a while, it's like kind of,
what are we doing here?
Yeah. It's like, I want to, like,
Make
I like
something.
to watch artsy movies, but like, hell, even Natural Born Killers had a story arc,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's
Movie,
kind
by
of
the
like
way.
that.
Good movie.
Yeah.
I get it, man.
And
I get it.
thanks for listening to those tracks, dude. Like, I appreciate that.
No doubt, man. I really liked what I heard. I can't wait to hear like a real studio version of it, man, where it's really really crisp and really dialed in, or to see you guys live. I'm sure that's a cool experience. I know it's kind of weird, weird times to see live bands, but you definitely got to let me know when you guys do get up live in Kansas City or St. Joe or Maryville. I'll make a trip, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this podcast, man.
Yeah, man. Hey, dude, thanks for having me. Do you know who's going to be your next guest?
I got another guest lined up, but you're gonna have to come back, man. We had too much fun. We had too much fun, and we didn't even scratch the surface yet. We got a lot of shit to talk about.
I know you're wrapping up here, but I wanted to throw out earlier with something you were saying. I liked your dad's comment and part of the theme of your interview with him, where he was talking about it's not the end of the world, but it's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean? So it's like we're back to choose your own adventure, and like, what a time to be alive, man.
Definitely, man. And I honestly believe, like I said earlier, man, we got the power. Us collectively as human beings, man, we have the power to make this something truly beautiful and something to be proud to be a part of, man. Thanks a lot, Dereck, man. You're an awesome dude. Take it easy. Let me know when you're performing, man. Do you want to let these people know where they could follow you or see any of your music or any of your artwork? Do you have any art showing?
Oh, I don't have anything actively up on exhibit right now, but you can find me on Instagram. God, I hate plugging these social media platforms,
I get it,
but
man.
Deviator's on Facebook too. It's pretty sad with our presentation for now, but like we'll get it cleaned up before long. But you can find us on the usual social medias as far as that goes. Just look me up.
Man. Dereck do. Hell yeah, man. I appreciate it. Take it easy, brother.
Yeah, man. Later on.
Peace.